That night Bob Dylan stopped singing mid-verse, offered no explanation to the crowd, and simply stared at an elderly woman in row 7. The silence lasted for minutes. The Orpheum Theater, Boston, October 1978. A Tuesday night. 2,000 people packed into worn velvet seats, the air thick with cigarette smoke and anticipation. Bob Dylan was 3 songs into his set. No backing band tonight, just him and an acoustic guitar, the way people remembered from before everything got complicated. He was singing, "Girl from the North Country," the 3rd verse. His voice rough and weathered, the harmonica around his neck catching the stage light. The audience sat in that particular silence that comes when people are actually listening, not just waiting to applaud. Then, mid-line, Dylan stopped. Not a pause. Not a breath. A full stop. His fingers stilled on the guitar strings. His mouth closed. He lowered his head slightly and looked out into the audience. Specifically into row 7, slightly right of center. The silence stretched. 10 seconds. 20. The audience shifted in their seats, uncertain. Someone coughed. Someone else whispered a question that went unanswered. Dylan didn't move. Didn't speak. Just stood there under the single warm spotlight, staring at someone no one else could identify in the dim house lights. 40 seconds of absolute silence in a concert hall is an eternity. Finally, very quietly, Dylan stepped back from the microphone. He lifted the guitar strap over his head and set the instrument carefully against its stand. Then he walked to the edge of the stage, sat down with his legs hanging over, and continued to look at row 7. The woman sitting there, elderly, white hair, wearing a coat that seemed too heavy for the season, looked back at him with the kind of stillness that matched his own. No one in the Orpheum Theater understood what was happening. But everyone felt it. Something private had become public. Something from the past had walked into the present. Dylan sat on the edge of the stage for 3 full minutes. Then he stood, walked back to his guitar, lifted it back over his shoulder, and finished the song. He never explained. He never mentioned it. But he changed the setlist for the rest of the tour. "Girl from the North Country" was never played again that year. To understand that silence, you have to go back to 1961. To a different theater. A different city. A different Bob Dylan entirely. Dylan didn't explain himself. He never did. Minneapolis. The 10 o'clock Scholar Coffee House. Bob Dylan wasn't Bob Dylan yet. He was 20 years old, barely scraping by, playing folk songs for college students who paid more attention to their coffee than his guitar. He slept on friends' couches. He wore borrowed clothes. He had ambitions so large they frightened him and a talent he didn't quite know how to use yet. The Scholar was a basement venue, dark, cramped, smelling of espresso and damp wood. On a good night, maybe 40 people showed up. Dylan played Tuesday and Thursday evenings for tips and free coffee. One Thursday in November, a woman came to hear him play. She was maybe 60 years old, dressed simply, sitting alone at a corner table with a cup of tea she never drank. She came back the next Thursday. And the Thursday after that. Dylan noticed her because she was the only person who seemed to actually listen. While college students talked and flirted and studied, this woman sat perfectly still, her hands folded on the table, watching him with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable. After his 4th Thursday set, she approached him as he was packing his guitar. "You're going to be important," she said. No introduction. No small talk. Just that single sentence in a voice that carried absolute certainty. Dylan, 20 years old and perpetually broke, laughed. "Yeah? You gonna buy me dinner to celebrate? I'm serious. You have something rare. But you're going to lose yourself trying to hold on to it. Everyone who becomes what you're going to become loses themselves." Dylan stopped laughing. Something in her tone made the small basement room feel larger, colder. "Who are you?" he asked. "My name is Helen Strand. I taught music for 40 years. I've seen hundreds of talented young people. Maybe 5 had what you have. Only one of them survived it. Survived what? Being the voice everyone needs you to be. It's not sustainable. The weight of it breaks people. She pulled a small piece of paper from her purse and wrote something on it. This is my address. When it gets too heavy, and it will, come find me. I'll be there. She handed him the paper and left. Dylan kept the address. He didn't know why. He folded it carefully and tucked it into his wallet behind a photo of his mother. 6 months later, he left Minneapolis for New York. The address went with him, a crumpled piece of paper he never threw away but never used, moving from wallet to wallet over the years as he became exactly what Helen Strand had predicted: important, necessary, the voice of a generation. The wait came, just as she'd said it would. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most important part of this story is still unfolding. By 1965, Bob Dylan was drowning. Not in failure, in success. In expectation. In the impossible demand that he remain frozen as the folk prophet, while his mind was already somewhere else entirely. The Newport Folk Festival. The electric guitar. The booing. The headlines. "Judas!" screamed from the crowd. The folk movement felt betrayed. Dylan felt suffocated. He started touring constantly. Writing constantly. Recording constantly. Anything to stay ahead of the wait. Anything to avoid standing still long enough for it to catch up. Then, in 1966, a motorcycle accident. Maybe real. Maybe convenient. Dylan disappeared from public view for nearly 2 years. When he came back, something had changed. He was quieter. More guarded. The prophet had been replaced by something more elusive, harder to pin down. He never went to see Helen Strand. He told himself he'd forgotten about her. That the crumpled address in his wallet was just an artifact from a past self he'd outgrown. But he never threw it away. The 70s brought different pressures. Bad reviews. Failed albums. Divorce. A Rolling Thunder review that felt more like running than performing. Christianity. Confusion. The world kept demanding the Dylan from 1963, and he kept refusing to give it to them because he didn't know how to be that person anymore. October 1978. The Orpheum Theater in Boston. 3 songs into a quiet solo set. Girl from the North Country. A song about someone left behind, someone from before everything got complicated. And there, in row 7, sat Helen Strand. She was 77 now. Still dressed simply. Still sitting with that same absolute stillness. Still watching him with an intensity that cut through 17 years and all the noise in between. Dylan saw her, and the third verse died in his throat. Away from the spotlight, Dylan made a choice no one expected. After the concert, Dylan didn't leave through the usual backstage exit where fans waited. He stood in the wings for 20 minutes, guitar still around his neck, not moving. His tour manager kept asking if he was okay. Dylan didn't answer. Finally, he walked back onto the empty stage. The house lights were up now, cleaning crew moving through the aisles. Row 7 was empty. But there was an envelope on the seat where Helen Strand had been sitting. Dylan picked it up. Inside, a single piece of paper. Helen's handwriting shaky now with age. "You came back to yourself? I see it in how you play now. Quieter. More honest. The weight is still there, but you're not running anymore. I kept my promise. I was here when you needed to remember who you were before you became what everyone needed. I won't be here next time you come through Boston. I'm dying. Cancer. Maybe 3 months. But I got to see you one more time, and I got to see that you survived it. Keep that old address. Not to find me, I'll be gone. But to remember, you were just a kid in a basement once, and someone saw you before the world did. That version of you is still in there. Don't lose him again. Helen." Dylan stood on the empty stage, reading the note 3 times. The cleaning crew worked around him. No one bothered him. Even strangers could see he was somewhere else entirely. He walked out of the theater at 2 a.m., got in a taxi, and asked the driver to take him to the address Helen had written 17 years ago. The same address still folded in his wallet, ink faded but legible. The building was a small house in a residential neighborhood. Dark. Quiet. Dylan sat in the taxi outside for 30 minutes, just looking at it. Then he told the driver to take him back to his hotel. He never knocked on Helen's door. He didn't need to. The message had been delivered. The reminder had been given. The weight was still there, it would always be there, but for the first time in years, Dylan understood he could carry it differently. What followed stayed with everyone who witnessed it, long after the sound faded. Dylan didn't change overnight. He never did anything overnight. But something shifted after Boston. The next album was quieter, more intimate. The critics called it a return to form, but it wasn't a return. It was an arrival at someplace new that only looked like the past from the outside. He started writing again. Not protest songs. Not prophecies. Just observations. Small moments. The kind of songs you write when you're not trying to save anyone, just trying to tell the truth. 3 months after the Boston concert, Dylan was in New York when he got a phone call. Helen Strand had died. Quietly. At home. She'd left instructions that no service be held, no obituary printed. Her house was to be sold, belongings distributed to a few charities. There was one exception. A small package addressed to Bob Dylan, care of Columbia Records. Inside, a black and white photograph. Dylan at 20, playing guitar in the basement of the 10 O'Clock Scholar, caught mid-song, his face young and open and completely unaware of everything that was coming. Helen must have taken it one of those Thursday nights without him knowing. On the back, in her handwriting. Before the wait. H.S. Dylan had the photograph framed. It sits in his home studio. Not prominently. Not where visitors would see it. But where he can see it when he's working. A reminder of the basement. Of the woman who saw him before the world did. Of the promise she kept. He never played. Girl from the North Country. In Boston again. When he tours through, he changes the setlist. It's a small thing. Private. The kind of decision no one notices except him. But years later, in a rare interview, someone asked Dylan about the addresses he'd kept over the years. All the places he'd lived, all the cities he'd passed through. "I've kept one address my whole life," Dylan said quietly. "Never been back to it. But I know exactly where it is. Sometimes that's enough. Knowing there was a place that saw you before you became what everyone needed you to be. Knowing someone was there when the weight got too heavy." The interviewer pressed him. "Where was this address?" Dylan smiled slightly. "Minneapolis. But the person's gone now. The place is just a place." He never mentioned Helen Strand by name. He never explained the photograph in his studio. He never told the story of the Boston concert, or the letter left on a seat in row 7. But those who were there, the 2,000 people in the Orpheum that October night, remember the silence. They remember watching Bob Dylan sit on the edge of the stage for 3 minutes, staring at someone they couldn't identify, saying nothing, explaining nothing. Share and subscribe. Some stories deserve to be remembered. The weight is still there. It always will be for people like Dylan, people who become more than themselves, who carry what a generation needs them to carry. But sometimes, someone sees you before the weight arrives. And if you're lucky, they remind you of who you were in a basement, just playing guitar, before the world decided what you had to be. Helen Strand died knowing Dylan had survived. Dylan survived knowing someone had been watching, waiting, keeping her promise. He never went back to that address in Minneapolis. But he never threw it away either. The photograph still sits in his studio. Before the wait. That's enough. Share and subscribe. Some stories deserve to be remembered.